Okay, and we're going to begin the lecture on the festival of Shavuos. It's referred to the festival of weeks. We count 7 weeks from Pesach, from the second day of Passover, and we count towards Shavuos, which is the festival of weeks, which is the day that we became a Jewish people. God took us as his people, and we accepted God's offer, and we accepted unequivocally his Torah, his mandate. And God says, because of that, from now on, going forward, forever, for all eternity, you are the holy people, you are the kingly, princely people. From now on, you are my treasure. As a king has his treasure, the Jewish people are God's treasure. That expression only indicates to what degree he values us, and he has that special endearment for us based on the expressions, the words which the Torah uses at the time when we became the Jewish people. We find that there's an obligation from Shavuos going forward to bring the new fruits to the Temple Mount, the 7 species which the land of Israel was known for, the grains, the grape, the pomegranate, the figs, the dates, the fruits and the species which the Torah articulates and delineates which are the fruits and the grains of Israel. And we bring them as a gift to the Temple Mount to offer our thanks for all that God had done for us from the beginning of time until giving us the land. And this is the produce, the first of the produce of the land, which you gave us as a gift. It's referred to as Chag HaBikurim, as the word Bechor means firstborn. These are the first fruits, Bikurim, they are the first of the fruits. And the Torah identifies the holiday as Chag HaBikurim, which is a little unusual. If the essence of the day is the most important day in the history of existence, that this moment was the moment that the objective of creation had come to fruition, how does the Torah not make this public knowledge? We find at the beginning of creation, every day God created one of the days of creation. It says, it was evening, it was morning, it was the first day, the second day, the third day. It comes to the 6th day, it says, Vayerev Vayivoker Yom Hashishi. It was evening, it was morning, it was not 6th day, the 6th day. By the other days, that hey, which indicates it was the 6th day. The hey seems to be superfluous. What's the value of that hey, the? So Rashi cites the Midrash. The God says that this world that I created has one purpose. And that's the purpose is that the objective is that the Torah should be received by the Jewish people after so many years. If they receive the Torah on the 6th day of Sivan, then the world will go forward. And if not, the world will revert back to pre-existence. Because what is the value of existence? Only that this is the playing field for the observance and the adherence to the positive and negative commandments of the Torah. If not, existence has no value. God says if the Jews reject and are not willing to accept the Torah, the world reverts back to pre-creation. That's Yom HaShishi. The 6th day, the 6th day means all this until then is all on a very iffy basis. What will solidify and guarantee the continuation of existence, that 6th day of Sivan, which is so many days, the 50th day after we left Egypt. If the Jews embrace the Torah, the world goes forward. If not, reverts back to pre-creation. So if you have such a moment, the most profound, important moment of existence, that is the determining moment whether the world continues or reverts back to pre-existence. How does the Torah not go public on this? The day that the world took on its permanence, the day God chose his people, that day, somehow the Torah sweeps it under the carpet, keeps it. It's the best kept secret in the world. The Torah depicts that day as the day of the bringing of the new grains and the new fruits. I'll give you an example, which is similar. Rosh Hashanah is referred to in the Torah as the day of the blast of the ram's horn. Yom Teruah, the day of the blast of the horn. That's the first day of Tishrei, when the world came into being. We say Hayom Haras Olam. This is the day of the birth of the world. This is when Adam and Eve were created. On the first day of Tishrei, the Torah refers to it as the day of the blast. Is that all that it is? It's based on a verse in Psalms and Tehillim. It's the day of judgment, when God judges every aspect of existence, every human being who ever lived. All the souls of the past and the present are judged on this day. What will be the world's predicament? Blessing by the sword, by drowning, by fire, whatever it may be. What we say in the Desana Tokef. It's such a profound day, the day of judgment. It's a day we have to prepare for. And the Torah somehow conceals the reality of the day, and I only know about it because it was passed down in tradition through David, King David, and he alludes to it in a verse in Psalms. And the Torah refers to the day of judgment, the day of the blast of the ram's horn. I mean, why is it such a best kept secret? The day of the receiving of Torah of Sinai, which is the objective creation, is the day of the bringing of the new fruits. And the day of judgment is the day of the blast of the horn. This question is asked by the Maral of Prague. So he says something interesting. You know, we have many different levels of Jews. Some Jews, all they know is they're Jews. But in regard to their level of affiliation, it's very weak. Other Jews are slightly more affiliated. They identify as Jews. They see themselves as part of God's people. So there is a Jewish connotation to their life. Then the people are more advanced, more observant, more learned. Now, before the Sinai event, before we taken as God's people, what was the degree of our obligation? The degree of obligation was the 7 Noahide laws, which basically means live as a civilized human being. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, one should not commit incest, don't eat a limb off a living animal, first kill the animal, then you're permitted to eat it. Don't blaspheme God, don't do idolatry. Establish a judicial system. Those are the Noahide laws, 7 Noahide laws. Every human being who has some degree of relevance to quality of life would embrace the 7 Noahide laws. It's not such a imposition or infringement on the freedoms of a human being. You can have all the pleasures of the world. Only these few areas are taboo, are off limits to you. Not so terrible. Oh, in addition, if you're a Jew, you have to be circumcised, because that was the covenant of Abraham. But outside of that, it's not a problem. That kind of, all of a sudden, God says now at Sinai, I give you an ultimatum. Either you accept my Torah, which is 613 commandments, precepts, 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments, If you accept it, we continue. If not, we end the relationship. And the world reverts back to pre-existence. It's like going from breathing endless levels of oxygen to being suffocated, God forbid. It's like I'm carrying a 5-pound weight, and now you're putting 10,000 pounds on my back. It's a new level of responsibility. Every aspect of our life is dictated by some precept of the Torah, whether it's an obligation to do or it's a transgression if you cross that line. You know something? It's frightening. You want to run the opposite direction. But there's a theme in regard to the holidays of the Torah. Every Jew, at whatever level you're at, there has to be a degree of joy. You embrace it with joy, with happiness. Because there's a mitzvah of the samachta b'chagech, we have to rejoice. That component of joy has to have relevance to every Jew, regardless of what station in life he's at. No background, slight background, more intense background. At whatever level is, you have to celebrate the holiday, the festival with joy. The Jew who is barely affiliated, or Jew who is less learned, you confront him with this level of obligation. He says, until now, life was mine. From now on, my life is no longer mine. You've put me into a setting, I'm basically in solitary confinement. I can't move an inch in either direction. This is dread, God forbid. But God says, no. The holiday has to be presented in a context that every Jew, wherever you're at, you could relate to it with joy. Therefore, the Torah, when it openly depicts it and presents it, it's a day of bringing of the new fruits. The first ripening of the fruits of the grains, you bring it as a gift to the Temple Mount, and you say to God, thank you for all you've done for me. All the blessing in my life is attributed to you. You prostrate yourself, you make the declaration, you go home, and you enjoy life. Therefore, the Torah, when it identifies the holiday of Shavuos, it's the festival of weeks, it's the festival of the bringing of the new fruits, for that reason. Day of judgment, person gets a letter from the IRS. It's already registered mail. And not only that, you have a marshal delivering the letter, a federal marshal. This person, he calls his doctor, he says, I need a sedative. I'm having anxiety attack. The day of judgment. As we say in the Musaf service on Yom Kippur, there's nothing which is forgotten before God's holy throne. Every nuance of our life is on record. You can't escape reality. You're under the gun. Everything is evaluated, everything is judged. It's the most terrifying day of a person's life. If you take it seriously and you relate to what's going on. It's like hitting a person between the eyes. You're on the crosshairs of God. How do you experience such a day? It's frightening. It's terrifying. Every person comes dressed in his best, new suit, new hat, new shirt, new tie. You're going to listen to the cantor, and you're going to hear the blast of the ram song, and it's the best I've ever heard. It brings back memories. It makes me feel like I was sitting in my great-grandmother's eating her matzah balls with the chicken soup. You know something? God says it's okay, because not every Jew could relate and understand the value of being in contact with the reality of what the day is. But every Jew has to be able to relate to every holiday at his level. So therefore, the Torah presents it at the most simple level, that every Jew should be able to embrace the day of Rosh Hashanah. It's the day of the blast. It's the silence of any level of prosecution. It's a shoo-in. When we have that ram song, we hear that blast. And when the cantor sings, and we pay for that ticket, they cost you $300. You may get it gratis, if you have pull, whatever it is. As long as you're in synagogue or in temple, it's good enough. And the women wear their best, their finest, and the men wear their finest. maybe a little less cologne, whatever it may be. That's what they used to wear. But in the reality, the person's running a business. He's making money hand over fist, but he never takes inventory. And he's not in touch whether he's actually hemorrhaging and he's not making money. Money may be coming in, but it's going out a lot quicker than it's coming in. So what is the day of judgment? The day of judgment is, it puts the fear of God in you that you better do some level of introspection. You better make a self-accounting of yourself to understand where you stand. But the value of that, if you fix the books before you come before the judge, you're in good shape. And then when you come, having everything in order and everything being addressed, there's nothing to be fearful of. But that's only the person who's more learned and understands the value and the reality of living more responsibly, that everything is within the realm of correction. We could set things in order. It's true. If you don't, then you're going off the cliff. You're going to the gallows. But you're informed soon enough that if you make the corrections, and even when the day of judgment passes, you have 10 days of penitence where Yom Kippur is the most merciful day. With the slightest degree of initiative, God is willing to forgive you. But if you appreciate that, you have the capacity to appreciate that, it's unloading endless debt for a few pennies with the slightest degree of effort. It's a win. It's a bonanza. But that's only if you have an appreciation. You have to have somewhat of a background. You have to be learning to a degree. A person is offered, we have Edward, who's the brother of Queen Elizabeth. He abdicated the throne. He could have been the King of England. But because he had a relationship with a commoner, he says, no, thank you, he walked away. If I'm the prince, I have restrictions. I'm the king, I have restrictions. But you want to know something? You know what it means to be the King of England? At one time when that was valued, he was willing to give away the store for what? For something he valued. But in the reality of what he gave up, it wasn't equitable. It's true, there's no question. God says you could be my princely, kingly nation. We can have a relationship which no one in the history of creation has ever had. You can be part of God's intimate group, the cleave to the infinite. But to be worthy of that, you have to meet certain criteria. It's worth it. But I have to go to become that heavyweight champion boxer. I have to eat a certain diet. I have to exercise I have to have so much sleep. If I want to become the neurosurgeon, which I'll be earning endless amounts of money, I can't drink caffeinated coffee. I have to go to bed every night at 8 o'clock. I have to live a different life. But if you understand the value of becoming the neurosurgeon, it's worth it. Because what you're giving up for what you accomplish and the lives you could save, and you understand that, it's worth it. Chairman of the board of General Motors. I work a 9-to-5 job in the post office, come home, I bowl with my buddies, I get my Rheingold Valentine's beer, and we have the bowling league, and I got my towel, and I got my little lunchbox, and that's enough. I don't need more than that. But here I'm offering you the world. I prefer my life not to be complicated. But you can make a big difference. Not that it's comparable, but it's appreciating opportunity. Becoming God's people regardless of the restrictions are in our best interest. It's not denying you something. It's putting you on a pedestal where only the most special have relevance, that make those are the connectors. That connects you to the source of being part of the infinite. But you have to have a capacity to appreciate that. You have to be more learned. Therefore, the Torah says it's Chag HaBikurim. It's the festival of the new fruits. But in reality, if you make the calculation from when we left Egypt to what happened 50 days later, the more learned, if you do your homework, you realize that day is the day that we became God's people, God's chosen people. We became the priestly, kingly nation. We became the holy people. Now, at every holiday, when we say the Amidah, there's an insertion. We say, Yalav Yavo. It's to acknowledge the day being special. And we refer to the day before the Yalav, we refer to it, we say, Zman Matan Torasenu, Chag Shavuos, the holiday of the weeks, which is the time of the giving of our Torah. That's what it is. We're commemorating the time when the Torah was given to us. Zman, the time of Matan Torasenu, the time of the gifting of our Torah. What does that mean? Gifting of our Torah. It's the gifting of the Torah. It's God's Torah. But yet, the terminology which we use is the time of the giving of our Torah. What does that mean? Our Torah. A person leases a car, Lavdil. You have a lease. The car belongs to the leasing company. You're responsible, but the car belongs to the leasing company. When God gave us his Torah, which is the blueprint for all existence, as it says, God looked in the Torah and he created the world. That means everything in the world was created only because somehow it has relevance to the observance of the Torah, to the fulfillment of the Torah. Therefore, the blueprint of existence was the Torah itself. The spiritual profile of every Jewish soul is a reflection of the Torah itself. So the Torah was originally presented and created by God to reflect the profile of our spirituality, of our potential. So it's the time of the giving of our Torah. The Torah is meant for us to perfect ourselves. It's tailor-made to address every component of our soul, to bring it to a level of perfection, to be able to merit the ultimate, which is having a relationship with God. That's what it's about. So the insertion, we say, Zman, it's the time of the giving of our Torah. Our Torah. It's initially, of course, it was created by God, but it was structured to be ours. Because it's actually an infusion. And I always mention the name of Rav Chaim Vital, that is, we have 613 commandments, 248 positive commandments, the 248 components to the Jewish soul. And there's a correlation, a corresponding factor between every positive commandment and every one of those components of the soul. And when we fulfill that positive commandment, what we call the mitzvah, it infuses the soul with a level of spiritual energy, which allows us to be part of eternity. Chofetz Chaim writes that as much as we nourish our physicality, after a short period of time, it needs a reinfusion of nourishment. Otherwise, the person fades out and dies. If the soul is meant to be eternal, it needs an eternal infusion of energy. The mitzvah itself, in its own essence, has that ability to infuse it with that eternal spirituality. The spiritual sustenance, which is needed to become part of eternity. Since Matan Torah Seidu, it's the time of the giving of our Torah. It was structured specifically to accommodate our souls. It's ours. I always mention the name of the Maharal of Prague and the Ramchal, that in Judaism, holidays are not purely commemorative, but rather every holiday is a reenactment of the moment that took place on that time of the calendar in previous years. So if on the 6th day of Sivan, God descended from heaven to openly communicate with his people, to present the Torah to them, offer the Torah to them, on that same date on the calendar, all the energies that were released on that particular day, again, are released. And if we are in the right setting, we observe the day, and we commit ourselves in a certain way to the value of that day, we become beneficiaries of those energies as the Jews were at the time when the Torah was given at Sinai, of that level of relationship. Identically the same. Because we are a continuum of that moment. Based on a verse in the Torah, although we were not at Sinai in the physical sense, but every Jewish soul that was created and meant to come into being, the soul was at Sinai. So besides the 3 million people, 4 million people who were there in the living state at Sinai, who were exposed to God's presence, every Jewish soul was there, exposed to God's presence. That means every Jewish soul was spiritualized with that level of exposure, and we till today are beneficiaries of that spiritual exposure. That impacted on our, what we call neshamos, on our souls. But in addition to that, every year when we experience the time of the giving our Torah, those energies are released again and our souls are touched by that same energy. The Talmud tells us, the Gemara tells us, what day of the week was the Torah given to the Jewish people? Everybody agrees it was given on Shabbos. On the 7th day of the week, which is Shabbos, that's when the Torah was given to the Jewish people. It's interesting. Why did God choose the Shabbos? We know Shabbos is the holiest day of the week. There's no day holier than the Shabbos. Every holiday, for it to assume its level of sanctity, the month has to be consecrated by the High Court of Israel. It's called Kiddush HaChodesh. They sanctify the month. Shabbos, from the beginning of creation existence, Shabbos was naturally holy. The 7th day automatically assumed that holy status. Why? So the Midrash tells us that after the world was created, after 6 days and the world was pretty much complete, God entered into existence on the 7th day. Now that the world is complete, now it's time for God to enter into existence. God entering into the physical existence that he created energized every aspect of that existence. And therefore, every aspect of existence assumed a holy status because there was an infusion of God's presence in every aspect of that physical existence. That's Shabbos. And that's what we say Shabbos in the words of Chazal, of the Talmud, the Midrash, is Me'ein Olam Habo. Shabbos has a semblance of the world to come. What do you mean it has a semblance of the world to come? What is the world to come? The world to come is a relation with God. That's what it is. And you have to be worthy and qualified to have that relationship. Shabbos itself is a day that even the physical existence, if you observe the Shabbos, you can be a beneficiary of his presence. Because his presence enters into the world every 7th day. As initially at the time of creation, when the world was created, God's presence entered into existence, was energized and spiritualized all existence. Every cycle of 6th to 7th day, God re-enters into existence and re-energizes all existence. That's what Shabbos is. There's no holier day than Shabbos. It's the holiest day of the year. Even holier than Yom Kippur. Because here God enters himself. It's not something we have to consecrate the day for God to have relevance. This is a reenactment of the original cycle of creation. So what would be the most appropriate, opportune time to give the Torah, which is ultimate, the holiest entity of existence outside of God himself? It's God's wisdom. It's God's mandate. You can only have a relationship with God if you live within the context of the Torah. So if the Torah is, if Shabbos is Me'ein Olam Habo, if Shabbos has a semblance of the world to come, then we can have a relation with God in this world as physical beings. If you meet the criteria of observing the Shabbos, which are the 39 creative activities, we say the Kiddush, We declare the day, which is a positive commandment, as the day that God created the world. You do that, even the physical existence, we can have a relationship with him. It has a semblance of the world to come. So the Torah, which ultimately gives us the share of the world to come, what is the most appropriate day that Torah should be given? It should be the holiest day. It should be the day that's the most spiritualized. We're already exposed and we're connected to that level. Now, it's very interesting. We find that when we left Egypt, after the sea split, we Jews always complain, always complaining. We always feel we're shortchanged. They saw the splitting of the sea, they sang the song of the sea, and they articulated, they repeated after Moshe Rabbeinu. All of a sudden, they come to an oasis, and they realize the water is bitter. And they start complaining. We're going to die of thirst, we and our livestock. God says to Moshe, take a tree, put it into the water will become sweet. So that location, the Torah tells us, they identified that location as Mara. Mara means bitter. Because the water was bitter, it was called Mara. Mara means bitter. And then it says, at Mara, some lo chok. God set a statute there. I mean, God gave Jews certain mitzvahs at Mara. This is pre-Sinai. What mitzvahs were given at Mara? Honoring a parent, the observance of the Shabbos, and the Parah Aduma, and the Lord Red Heifer, and also Mishpotim, that you have to have a judicial system. Those are the mitzvahs that were given at Mara. So Shabbos already was given at Mara after this miracle took place, and the waters were converted to sweet waters to be potable. These Shabbos was given to the Jews. There was no liability death penalty, but they already introduced to Shabbos. Why was that so integral? This is pre-Sinai. Because what is Shabbos? Shabbos, the seventh day of the week, as I said, has a semblance of the world to come. It's the day that God enters into this existence. And you can have a relation with God even in the physical world. Because the world is spiritualized at a level which is nothing compared to that spiritualization. That is a prerequisite to the giving of Torah at Sinai. Giving Torah at Sinai, that allows us to be elevated and spiritualized with the Torah, which is God's wisdom, which gives us direct connection to be attached most intimately with God if we live by the mandate of God, the positive and negative commandments, and we study his Torah. It converts the physical into the spiritual. It's a spiritualization of the physical, a total spiritualization of the physical. Therefore, if I have a day to choose on which day the Torah should be given, which day would be the most appropriate day, it would be Shabbos. If everybody agrees, the Talmud says the day the Torah was given at Sinai was the seventh day of the week, was Shabbos. Because the Shabbos is me'ein olam haba. It has a semblance of the world to come. And the Torah gives us that full share in the world to come at the most advanced level to be able to cleave to God, to become part of God. Therefore, the Torah being that entity is given on that day where God himself exists within this existence. Except Sinai was a magnification of that reality. As it says, God brought heaven to earth and his presence settled on top of the mountain. The Gemara tells us that before God offered the Torah to the Jewish people, he offered it to the nations of the world. And each of the nations, they rejected it for their own reason. The Edomites were offered the Torah. So the first thing they asked God is, what's it all about? So God says to them, it says in my 10th commandments, my Decalogue, lo tirtzoch, thou shalt not commit murder. He said, something, we wish we could accept it, but we have a blessing from our forefather. Al char b'chatichia, we live by the sword. It doesn't conform with our lifestyle. And went to another one. It says, lo tinof, It says lo tignov. You're not permitted to be engaged in kidnapping, the slave trade. The Arabs said, you know something, Yishmael, the Arabs, but that's our bread and butter. We're involved in the slave trade. Can't accept it. Another one, he said, it says, do not commit adultery, incest, we live a loose lifestyle. Doesn't conform. Every one of them rejected it for his own reason. He comes to the Jewish people, he offers it to us. We don't even ask the question, what is it all about? We immediately say, Naseh v'nishma. We accept unequivocally, just tell us what to do. That was the Jews' response. Not to even ask the question, what is it all about? And whatever he would say, we accept. Not even that. We had such faith and trust in God. God, whatever it is, we accept it. If it's your law, we accept it. We accept it unequivocally. Just tell us what to do, and we do it. When we said Naseh v'nishma, God immediately announces to his heavenly retinue of angels, Migilo Roselu Bonai, who revealed the secret to my children. They speak like angels. An angel has that level of clarity. He's always waiting for the order, for the charge. But a human being who's consumed with himself, usually the first question to ask would be, explain to me the extent of the obligation. To what degree will I be compromised? The Jews didn't ask that question. The Jews understood the value of doing God's will. That's the ultimate opportunity, without a question. So God was astounded. He says, Migila Rosel Banai, who revealed the secret to my children? And therefore, for those two words that they said, Naseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, God sent 600,000 angels. And each Jew received a spiritual crown, two crowns, one spiritual distinction for Naseh, and the second spiritual distinction for the Nishma. Meaning, like a person has a halo. They had two halos, which radiated the impact of accepting unequivocally God's will, which is the Torah itself. That's Naseh v'nishma. The Gemara quotes a pasuk, a verse, that the Jewish people are like tapuach bayar. The word tapuach in Hebrew means an apple. Ketapuach batzei ayar. So the Midrash says, the Talmud says, Loma nimshlo letapuach. Why the Jewish people at Sinai compared to the tapuach, to the apple? Loma loch mat tapuach ze pirio kodim olov. Just as the apple, the fruit precedes its leaves. Of Yisrael, higdimu nasl nishma. Identically, the Jews, they said, we accept equivalently before they heard what the order was. So the commentators ask, what do you mean? An apple is no different than any other fruit. The leaf is prior to the development of fruit, because the leaf protects the fruit as it buds until it develops into a fruit. Then it sheds its leaf. So why does it refer to the tapuach as the fruit that the fruit precedes the leaves? So the commentators explain that tapuach doesn't mean an apple. We find that the esrog, the citron fruit, is also called tapuach. The Talmud tells us that the esrog remains in the tree for more than a year. I mean, initially when it grows and buds, it has one set of leaves. After it's fully developed, there's another set of leaves that grow, which follow the development of the fruit. So that's what it means. Just as the citron is the only fruit where the fruit has a second set of leaves, that means the fruit, after it's developed, it precedes the leaf. Identically, the Naseh, they said, we accept unequivocally, and then they said the Nishma. The leaf follows afterwards. That's the doing. I mean, what is the meat of everything? What is the core? The core is the level of trust and commitment. We stand ready to do, regardless of what the extent of that obligation is. it's very interesting. We find that originally when God created vegetation, on the third day of creation, he originally gave the order that the earth should give forth eitz pri osa pri, a fruit tree which produces fruit. And then when it actually happened, it says eitz osa pri, meaning originally the bark of the tree was supposed to be edible, not only the fruit itself. The way it manifested itself, the order was not followed by the earth as God had commanded it, and therefore only the fruit is edible, the bark of the tree is not edible, or the peel is not edible of certain fruits. But it's interesting, the only fruit which the rind or the bark is edible like the fruit is the esrog. That's the only fruit. Could you imagine? The fruit that the Jewish people are depicted by, that it has the second set of leaves, which represents the ultimate level of spiritual, like angels. That's the esrog, that's the citron. The Jews are compared to the citron. The fruit precedes the leaves, the second set of leaves. The citron was the fruit which actually developed exactly as God gave the order. That's like the perfect aspect of creation. The Jewish people among all the nations of the world, we are the elite. We're not even within the same classification. The 70 nations, we're the 71st. We transcend nature. The natural order is expressed through the number 7. We are the 71st nation. We transcend the natural order. The esrog, it transcends anything that was created, because that exactly developed and evolved exactly as God wanted it to be. The Jewish people being the chosen people, despite the paganism and the rejection of God and the suppression of God, Avram Avinu, who's the founding father of the Jewish people, he recognized God as the creator, and therefore the Jewish people don't exist within the realm of nature. Within the natural order, we transcend the natural order. Therefore, you're the 71st nation, rather than being part of the 70, which is number 7 is natural because the world was created in 7 days. I'm going to stop here and just entertain